Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hey there, and welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for picking this podcast. I know that you have like 2 million choices when you look at all the podcasts that have been started over the last several years. And I'm really excited that you have decided to join us here for this show, because this is the show that was designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show for now over 2 years, and I am usually joined by Craig Brown. Craig is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors, but every 4 or 5 weeks, we do a career-oriented podcast where I interview an author, an expert, thought leader on a topic that is really important to all of you. And today, we are going to talk about attention management. Let's face it, we all live in a world where there are so many distractions coming at us, probably more distraction than at any time in human history. So you need to make sure that you're as productive as possible. And today, we are joined by Maura Thomas. Now, Maura helps people make the most of their moments by teaching them about attention management, not time management, because attention management is the new path to productivity. Hey, Maura, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
So happy to be here, Thom. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So for everyone who's listening, Maura and I have been friends for a very long time, and I have watched her go from just sort of entering this training and coaching world of teaching people about productivity and time management to really becoming the leader when it comes to this whole concept of attention management. So, Maura, let's start off by talking about the differences between time management, productivity, and attention management. Is there a difference?
I think there is. And that was a very kind introduction. Thank you so much for saying so. I do think there is. So we have framed our path to productivity in terms of time management for decades. But I think let's dissect that for a second. Productivity, there's a dictionary definition of the word productive, and it is achieving a significant result. So that's how I define productivity for my clients. How much progress you have made on the results that are significant to you. That's how productive you are in any given time frame. Today, this week, this year, this month, and ultimately this lifetime. So productivity is about achieving your significant results. And so for decades, we've talked about, well, if I just need to manage my time better, and then I would be more productive. But the truth is, we all know, we've said it for forever, we can't manage time, right? We can't manage time. But so I say to people, what does it mean to you to manage your time? What do you physically do? And they say, well, I make appointments with myself on my calendar. Well, that's awesome, because who's the first person you're going to break an appointment with?
Myself. Yeah. Thom,
Exactly.
Thom, you're fired. I'm busy today, Thom. You're fired. Yeah.
That's right. And so this idea that somehow that we can just, anything we ever want to get done in our lives, we just put it on our calendar and ta-da, magically it happens, isn't helpful. And I know that there's sort of these other things that people put under the heading of time management. But I think that the most important thing to recognize today in the 21st century is, as you said, our problem today is not that we don't have enough time. Because I'm sure you've had a day where you're like, man, I got so much done today. That was awesome. Sadly, those are fewer and farther between these days for most of us, but we've had those days. And we also have many, many days where we go, man, I was busy all day and I got nothing done. In both of those days, you had the same amount of time. It's not that you didn't have enough time. It's that you had too many distractions, and you can't solve a distraction problem with a time solution. The antidote to distraction is attention. And so that's why I think attention management is the new path to productivity.
So you're in the process of releasing a series of books. The first 2 have been released. The first one is called Attention Management. The second one I actually love, From To Do to Done. And so let's talk a little bit about those 2 books. I know there's more coming out down the pipe, but let's talk a little bit about those. What is the thought what is the premise of the book Attention Management? And then let's look at from to do to done.
Yeah. So the as you mentioned, it's part of a series. It's called the Empowered Productivity Series. And Empowered Productivity is the system that I teach people to be more productive. So Empowered Productivity, we call it a workflow management system in the productivity industry. You could also call it a life flow management system because it's about managing all of your responsibilities. And so it's a big umbrella, how to manage all that stuff, commitments, communication, information. The first book in the series is foundational. It is about managing your attention. And the latest book in the series, From To Do to Done, is about managing your tasks, your projects, your responsibilities, your commitments, not only things that you owe other people, but also things that other people owe you. All of those commitments that you've made that most people manage with some combination of sticky notes, flagged emails, appointments on their calendar, lists on legal pads, dry erase boards, appointments with themselves on their calendar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do we collect and store and organize and prioritize and most importantly, execute on all of that stuff that we have to do? That's what the second book in the series is about.
So, and then I know in November, the third book comes out and I love this one. It's called The Happy Inbox. And I think that is awesome because my inbox is very sad. I have so many, you look at like on your phone, it tells you how many unread messages you have. Like if anybody looks over my shoulder, they're like, how can anybody have that many unread messages? I'm like, well, they've been read like on my computer. I just haven't deleted them from here. So my attention management sucks. Now, you and I are friends. You know that is true. But if somebody listening is more like me and their ability to get that attention management focused with so many things on their to-do lists, where do people even start, Maura?
Yeah, the first thing that we have to recognize is that part of the reason that we are so distracted is on purpose because our technology has created in us a habit of distraction. So most of us get some sort of electronic ping, ding, vibration, something, notification every 1 or 2 or 3 minutes. That's how often those interruptions come in. And so we have become conditioned to what's that? What's that? What's that? And this happens during our workday because we have all of our devices around us during our workday. But the problem is once you have this habit, if it's something that happens every few minutes, it's going to become a habit. And then once it's a habit, and it's a habit that gets reinforced every few minutes, so it becomes a really strong habit. Once it's a habit, you can't just say, 6 o'clock, I'm going to leave that habit at the office and I'm going to go home and be fully present and maximize my focus with my family. It just doesn't work that way. Once you have a habit of distraction, you have a habit of distraction in all parts of your life. So that is the biggest thing to recognize is that if you do not control your environment and your technology, especially, then you will continue to succumb to this habit. And it's going to make your attention span shorter and shorter and shorter. And not only that, it's going to make you less and less and less and less patient. And that has some really dire consequences if we, that I can talk about if we don't rein it in.
So what are the consequences to being distracted at that level?
Yeah. So when we are constantly distracted, our ability to stay focused gets less and less, right? We become challenged by the opportunity to what I call muster the full range of our talents and skills and wisdom and abilities, because it's like, where's the next thing? A lot of us will just find ourselves just picking up our phone for no apparent reason, right? Like you're in the middle of doing something and suddenly your phone is in your hand because you just feel like you should have been checking it by now. And so our attention span gets shorter and shorter, which inhibits our ability to learn and our creativity and our problem solving. In fact, studies show that people who multitask a lot, people who task switch a lot, their IQ actually goes down over time. So it really does make us dumber in a real way. And it not only does it chip away at our attention span, but it also chips away at our patience. So not only do we have trouble staying focused for any period of time, but we also don't even want to stay focused for any period of time because we're so impatient. And the reason that is so insidious is because it makes us gravitate toward those fast and easy things. But really, the most important stuff for us is usually that stuff that on our to-do list that sort of sounds big and hard. it's those things that when we tackle them, we're like, oh my gosh, what a great day. That was so awesome. I was so productive. And so this habit of distraction makes us think. I used to call it the big lie, but now that has a little bit of a different connotation, right? But it's the big lie because it makes us think that we don't want to do these things. But when we do these things, it feels fantastic. And so that's the real problem with it.
So if somebody is working for a company, and a lot of the people who listen to the show work for big companies and work with, a variety of different people, who they either manage or their peers, if they're on a whole team and they just thought 2 seconds ago, oh my God, my whole team is dumb and impatient. What can they do, whether they're in a leadership role or in a peer role, to help get people focused on being more productive and on having that ability to have attention management?
Yeah. One of the biggest challenges for people inside organizations is that they feel that they must be available for every communication as it arrives. And we all often don't have a good system for communication, right? So we have all these different ways to communicate. We have email, we have voicemail, we have meetings, we have text message, we have instant message. And so and I don't know how you like to check your messages. And so that leads, have you ever gotten a message, like a text that said, hey, check your email?
Yes, in fact, usually from you, because I'm not keeping up when we're corresponding.
Because I know you, Thom. But yeah, so all of us are sort of checking different channels differently. And so now we get multiple messages about the same thing. And we feel like we have to be available to all of these channels all of the time because we don't have like a language of emergency. We don't say, don't worry about it. If it's important, I'll call you. And so people, for example, will send an email in an emergency or in a time-sensitive situation. And so people are like, I have to check. If every email that you get could be an emergency, then you have to treat every email like it is an emergency. Is that an emergency? Is that an emergency? Is that an emergency? And so you have to leave your email open and with messages arriving every minute. And so how are you supposed to get any other work done when you have every minute or two, you're like, what's that? What's that? What's that? So people are like, yeah, I just check it. I don't answer it. I just check it. Well, it's not the answering that's distracting. It's the checking that's distracting. So you have to be able to stay focused for an extended period of time with no distractions so you can do that really meaty, thoughtful, important work, like the kind of work that engineers and programmers and other kind of knowledge worker employees need to do.
So that brings up an interesting thing, because how do knowledge workers sometimes even measure their productivity? Because it's not like they're taking a widget from the left side of the desk and putting it on the right side of the desk. A lot of the productivity of knowledge workers is hard to quantify.
Knowledge workers, the very definition of a knowledge worker is somebody whose job outputs are intangible brain functions like ideas and creativity and analysis and solutions to problems and all that kind of stuff that you can't touch and you can't count. And so that's why I work with my clients to define productivity as achieving the results that are most significant to you, because how everybody from McKinsey to the Drucker Foundation to me is trying to figure out how do we quantify productivity of a knowledge worker. And really you have to quantify it in qualitative terms. Like, do you feel more productive? Do you feel like you're more in control of things? Do you feel like you achieved more of your important work today? And if you feel like you did, then you probably did. And so it's very hard. It's like you said, it's not like I did 50 widgets yesterday and I'll do 55 tomorrow.
So how do you think, and you've worked with a lot of clients this last year, I know that you had to pivot, as they say, to doing more online training and consulting, but do you think the pandemic has made us more productive, less productive, or it's kind of the same?
I think one thing that we can say for sure is the pandemic has made us more burned out. I think whether or not we're more productive it's impossible to make a generalization, because I think that single people with no kids were probably more productive working from home, and people with families and, two kids doing Zoom school and a spouse and both spouses working from home, it was probably crazy. And then you have every other situation in between. So I think it's very difficult to say, were we more productive or not? But one thing I think is very clear is that many people, but even again, those single folks working from home are probably like, this is awesome. But what happens is when we work from home, it's very easy to just roll out of bed, grab your phone, start your day, and then just work until 10 o'clock at night and not even kind of realize it. So I think longer work hours and ultimately burnout have been very, very common as a result of the pandemic.
So you've spent more than 2 decades studying this and teaching this. What are the biggest changes you've seen in this world of productivity over the past, call it 20 years?
Oh, goodness. Well, over the past 20 years ago, the technology, I don't think we had social media 20 years ago, or maybe just barely. Smartphones, internet connected smartphones that were easy to use, were, maybe just on the horizon. And so it was a whole different world. It used to be that when we got an email, it was like, oh, an email, right? It was like getting mail, like physical mail. You get a card in the mail and you're like, oh, or a letter, who's that from? And email was kind of the same thing. And now it's just overwhelming. There's so many different ways to communicate. I think that's the thing, is that communication has become just overwhelming in the last 20 years.
So that's a good transition into the up and coming book that you have coming out in November. Let's talk about the happy inbox, because I made a joke earlier about my inbox has like 3,000 pieces of mail in it. That might not be a joke. What can people do to manage email as part of their productivity and attention management efforts?
Yeah. Email is a huge challenge. And I really do think that people need to stay on top of their email, although that doesn't necessarily mean that I think email is the most important thing. But I do think that email does bring us very important things. And if you're not staying on top of your email, then those very important things get lost with all the very unimportant things. So in the book, I talk about, the subtitle is How to Have a Stress-Free Relationship with Your Inbox and Overcome Your Communication Clutter. Right. And so I call it the tyranny of the little red dot, right? Because you know how you look at your phone and if more than one little app has a little red dot, or if any apps have a little red dot on it, you're like, oh, I got to clear that. And that's part of, I think, what has robbed us of a lot of our downtime and time for our mind to wander. In attention management, I talk about the importance of daydreaming. And daydreaming used to happen in those in-between moments where you would, you'd be riding an elevator and your mind would wander about like the meeting you just had, or you'd be walking across the parking lot or waiting in line. And we had all these little moments for our brain to sort of reflect on what happens to us. And now all those moments are gone because first thing we do, you walk out of a meeting, you whip out your phone and you look for all the little red dots. I got to clear them. 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 So we feel like we always have to be doing instead of just being. And so that's a real challenge. And that's also definitely not the question you just asked me. So you want to ask it again?
Well, but I made a note because I do want to come back to this importance of daydreaming, but I did want to talk about specifically back to, the email itself. How do we get more effective? How do we have that relationship with our inbox that's going to be pleasant versus stressful?
Yeah. Okay. So there's 4 reasons essentially that most people are drowning in email. The first reason is that they don't filter. They just get too much. Anything, your inbox could have everything from, the sale at Nordstrom to a request for a proposal from your biggest client and anything in between. And the only way you know is to read it. And so we get all of these, we get way more messages than most people can ever wade through. So you need to filter so that what gets into your inbox during your workday is only the stuff that you really need, actual messages from actual people. So filtering so that we get fewer messages, or at least we get fewer messages and we only get the important ones. That's the first thing. The second thing is that most emails that we receive are just a list of things that we need to do. Most people don't have a good way to manage things that they need to do. And so they just sort of put a flag, like they read it. Most people's process for managing their email is what I call skim and skip, right? You're just looking for the fast and easy stuff that you could quickly delete or quickly answer. And anything that isn't quick, you're like, I'll get back to that later. But later never comes. And so, in From To Do to Done, the second book in the series, that's where I talk about how to manage those tasks, whether they come to you through email or any other way. So managing tasks we don't filter, we don't manage tasks well. The next thing is that we forget that email is actually work. Most people view email as like that thing that I will squeeze in between my work. but those messages from your clients and your vendors and your colleagues, those messages are work. And so you have to shift your perspective to recognize you got work to do. It's work that happens to come to you through email, but it's work all the same. And then the last reason is that once we recognize that as work, you have to leave an appropriate amount of time to do that work. If you get 50 messages a day and you figure it takes about 2 minutes to sort of deal with every message, like read it and figure out what needs to be done with it, that's 100 minutes. That's 90 minutes a day just on email, not counting the tasks that you have to do, but just dealing with the email. And most people that I talk to get way more than 50 messages. Most people get more like 100. So now you're talking about almost 3.5 hours of work that comes to you in your email inbox. And most people don't leave any time to do that.
So that's exhausting just to think about. And it's extremely true. I think for me, it is true, but I also think it's true for a lot of people who are listening here. So I don't have 3.5 hours in my day. Are there any tips where I can be more productive with it that will allow me to do that in less time?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's two things. So number one, the filtering will help. Like even if you just think, oh, that's just junk, I just delete it. It only takes me a second. But those seconds add up. If you get 50 of those, right? So you need to filter so that the number of messages that you get is much smaller. Now, the next problem is really a systemic problem of knowledge work. And that is that in most organizations, the way that work gets done is by everybody emailing everybody else with no real thought or planning or prioritization, right? There's no sort of central, like, this is how the work flows. It's anyone at any level of the organization can email anyone else with something to do. And now you have to figure out, where do I put that something to do in the grand scheme of things? And it might depend on, well, that guy's a vice president and that person isn't. So I'm going to answer that message, but maybe that message isn't as important to your work as the one from the other person. And so the way that we manage work is just sort of ad hoc. And to me, this is a responsibility of leaders. You have to take a look at, how does work flow through your organization? How does it get assigned? And once you can streamline that, then everybody's volume of messages goes down.
So I think I know the answer to this. What is your opinion of reply to all?
Almost never. Almost never. If you're getting an email that you feel like you need to reply all, that is a red flag that the way you're handling this communication, whatever it is, this topic, is not efficient. And you need to find a different way to do it.
All right. So before I let you go, I want to back up to one thing. And that was, you mentioned the importance of daydreaming. Now, we were answering another question. I wrote that down because I wanted to come back to this, because if you were to say, Thom, you're going to interview one of the leading experts in the United States about productivity and attention management, and she's going to tell you there is an importance to daydreaming, I wouldn't have expected that. So why is daydreaming so important for our brain?
The way that we move information from short-term memory to long-term memory is to give our brain an opportunity to process it. And there's an analogy that I love, and I'm pretty sure it comes from a book called Influencer by Carrie Patterson. And in that book, the author talks about your brain. He uses an analogy that your brain and your consciousness is like an elephant and a rider. So your brain is the elephant, your consciousness is the rider. Think about what a powerful beast the elephant is, your brain, right? Sometimes you just have to get your consciousness out of the way and let your brain do its thing. And that's when you have those in-between moments to allow your mind to wander, to daydreaming. That's when your brain can really unleash its power. That's when the rider gets off the elephant and the elephant can do its thing.
Well, you just made me feel real good, because my first job I managed a group of people, and I had a whiteboard. This is kind of pre-computers. This is like 30 some odd years ago. And I had a board of where people were going to be for different projects. And I had a coworker who used to come in and going, "What are you doing?" Because I would look at the board and visually try to decide who would get assigned what. And I used to say, "I'm contemplating the board." And she goes, "It looks to me like you're being lazy or you're daydreaming." And I used to argue that that was an important way that I did my job. And this coworker used to mock me for it. And now looking back 35 years later, apparently I was right. So you just made my whole day.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, I'm glad to make your day. That's awesome. But when you think about it, if we are knowledge workers, what is the raw material of knowledge work? It's thinking, right? And so, and to your point, though, one of the things I talk about in my trainings and in my books is that you have to control your attention. You have to control your environment in order to control your attention. Because when you are doing that important knowledge work that requires thinking, most people, if they see you sort of staring into space, to your point, right? The thought is, oh, he's not busy. I can go bother him, right? I can go interrupt him. But the truth is you're probably doing you might be doing your very most important work, and you just can't tell.
That's awesome. So before we let you go, any last tip on attention that you think everyone needs to know?
Yeah, the thing I love most about attention management as opposed to time management is that you can, like I'm a control freak, but I do know that there are a lot of things in this world that I cannot control, time being one of them, right? Time marches on. But my own attention should not be one of those things that I can't control. And so to me, the message is very empowering. I can take back control of my life. I don't have to be at the mercy of all of these constant pings and dings and distractions and what everybody else in the world wants me to attend to. I can live a life of choice and intention rather than a life of reaction and distraction.
I like that. A life of choice and intention. That's what I want for everybody here on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. So Maura Thomas, thanks for joining us. If somebody wanted to find out more about you, where would they go?
MauraThomas.com is the best place. And if you want to evaluate your own attention management skills, you can take an attention management assessment at MauraThomas.com/assessment.
Nice. Everybody go check that out. MauraThomas.com/assessment. And you're going to find out just how good you are. And I'm sure that everybody who listens to this is really good with their attention management and their productivity. Hey, everybody, thank you for tuning in and listening. Join us every week because we're going to have more thoughts, ideas, and information to help you grow your career in and around product lifecycle management. The Digital Enterprise Society is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Go check us out right now at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.